Welcome to the Graduate Job Podcast, your home for weekly information and inspiration to help you get the graduate job of your dreams.
Hello and welcome to the Graduate Job Podcast with your host, James Curran. The Graduate Job Podcast is your home for all things related to helping you on your journey to finding that amazing job. Each episode I bring together the best minds in the industry, speaking to leading authors, entrepreneurs, coaches and bloggers who bring decades of experience into a bite-sized weekly 30-minute-ish show. Put simply, this is a show I wish I had a decade ago when I graduated. Hello and welcome to the 74th episode of the Graduate Job Podcast. London is in the middle of a heatwave, the World Cup is in full swing, and England have even been doing well. So do forgive me for not having had an episode out for a few weeks. I do hope your job applications haven't been similarly sidetracked. But I'm back, braving the heat, to bring you some more brilliant episodes to help you find a graduate job. This week I've gone transatlantic again to help bring you a very special guest. Best-selling author Scott Mautz joins me on the show for a thought-provoking episode where we explore how to find an inspiring graduate job. Scott is the author of a new book, Find the Fire, and we explore this in detail as we delve into what will fire you up and get you excited in your first graduate job. And conversely, what are the things which are going to pour cold water on that passion and have you looking to move on to a different job? We explore the topic of finding happiness at work, looking at how to find what will inspire you even if you haven't worked before. Conversely, we also delve into 9 anti-muses to finding passion and inspiration at work, how you can recognise them and what you can do to avoid them. We touch upon whether it's realistic to expect to be inspired all of the time in your graduate job and what to do if your current job doesn't excite you. Scott also shares some brilliant insights into the topic of confidence, such as how to tackle a fear of failure when applying for a graduate job and how to increase your self-confidence in a job interview or assessment centre. No matter where you are in your job search, just starting out or through the application process, this is an episode you won't want to miss. As always, all links and a full transcript can be found in the show notes at graduatejobpodcast.com/inspiration. From there, you will also find links to all of the other 73 episodes which cover every aspect of getting a graduate job, from help with interviews, assessment centres, to specific companies, to finding a job you love. Check them out and you won't go far wrong. Don't forget, also make sure you pop by graduatejobpodcast.com/subscribe, which links to how to subscribe on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, and by email. So something for everyone there. Before we start though, let's have a little message from today's sponsor, who are our friends over at careergym.com. Now, if I said to you, are you ready to do verbal and numerical reasoning tests for the job of your dreams tomorrow? I bet most of you would say no. Well, graduate employers don't hang about. Some of them give you as little as 2 to 3 days notice before you have to do the tests, so you need to make sure you are ready and willing to do the tests and start practicing now, which is where Career Gym comes in. Career Gym is the number one place for you to undertake all of your psychometric tests which you'll face when you apply for a graduate job. No matter what graduate job you apply for, you're going to have to do some sort of tests, whether it's verbal and numerical reasoning, situational judgment and working style tests. You can practice these and many more over at careergym.com. They're all produced by testing experts and exactly the same as the ones you'll see in the real graduate job tests. You can practice them just as you want, or you can do them in exam mode under time pressure, and they all come with detailed explanations and solutions, and you can track your progress and see how you compare against your peers. Now, if you're applying for a graduate job, you're going to have to do them. So pull your finger out now and start revising straight away to make sure you don't fall at this very big first hurdle. I've been recommending this site for years to the clients I coach, and it comes very highly recommended. And what's even better is if you use the code GJP, that's GJP, you're going to get 20% off all of their tests. You can't say fairer than that. So head on over to careergym.com, that's careergym.com, and use the code GJP to get 20% off and start practicing today. Now on with the show. I'd like to welcome to the show a very special guest. He's led several of Procter & Gamble's largest multi-billion-dollar businesses. He's an award-winning speaker. He was named a CEO Thought Leader by the CEO Executive Guild and a Top 50 Leadership Innovator by Inc. magazine. He teaches leadership and employee engagement at Indiana University. He's the author of Find the Fire, Ignite Your Inspiration and Make Work Exciting Again, and also Make It Matter. All the way from the USA, welcome to the Graduate Job Podcast, Scott Mautz.
So happy to be here, and hello to all of your listeners out there.
So thanks, Scott. Thanks for joining us. And just reading that introduction, where do you find the time?
Like any of us, it's all a matter of choices. And when you're doing what you love, time seems to free up magically somehow.
No, very true. So I've given the listeners a brief intro there. Would you like to fill in any of the gaps on anything I've missed?
Oh, sure. Yeah, I'm a Procter & Gamble veteran, a company based out of the United States. I spent almost 25 years at Procter & Gamble leading really giant businesses. And as I like to say, the thing that I was most proud of was not just that I was able to lead those businesses successfully, but that the organizations grew and the people within it grew and became the best version of themselves while I was fortunate enough to be working with them and leading them. And that's really spurred, a big passion in me, James, to get out in the second season of my professional life, to help people find their own fire, make sure they're finding the kind of jobs that will sustain their motivation over the long haul, and to help people that might be mired in a job right now that they don't actually love, help them to reignite their passion. So your show and what I'm all about is really a great fit.
Oh, brilliant. And again, thanks for your time today. And we're going to delve into your latest book, Find the Fire, Ignite Your Inspiration and Make Work Exciting Again. And Scott, we're in a great position as in the book you talk about how 70% of people aren't inspired at work, which is a shocking statistic. But with my audience, as you can imagine, given its name, the majority of listeners are looking for that graduate job or that first big job. So today we can hopefully inspire them to make sure that they don't end up as one of the 70%. So
right on.
As a job seeker, how can listeners ensure that the job they are applying for is going to fire them up and inspire them?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. And I think to help understand that, it helps to understand how do we lose our way when we do enter a job. And what's so interesting, James, is when folks enter a job and they turn back and they figure out they're not so passionate about it anymore, which is, as you just pointed out, is the vast majority of them. 70% will say that. It helps to stop and say, well, how did they get into that position? And if we can understand that, we can help all the citizens out there that are about to enter the job world from making those same mistakes. And when you survey and research the people that are in those jobs that are not passionate about it, what you discover is they ultimately try to work their way out of that by asking themselves the question, well, okay, I can relight my own spark here. What inspires me? And then whatever the answer to that is, I'll just do more of that, and that'll be that. It'll be easy. But of course, it's never that easy, because the things that inspire us almost by nature, they're passive, they're elusive, they easily get repressed. And the better question to ask is, well, how did I lose my inspiration in the first place, actually? And when you can answer that question, it begins to unveil how people in the workforce lose their inspiration and what people that are about to enter the workforce can look for in their potential suitor employee so that they don't jump into an environment that contains these toxic elements. So these elements are what I call the 9 anti-muses. They're forces that drain the inspiration over time in a job environment. And whether you're in a job now, it's important to understand what these are. But if you're looking for a job, like many of your listeners are, or finishing up their studies at university and are thinking about moving on, these are the things to look for and identify whether or not you think that work environment might contain them. So if you'd like, James, I can quickly talk through these 9 forces that your audience should be on the lookout for.
Yeah, that'll be amazing. Thank you.
Okay, so I'll do that. So again, if you're out there listening and you're thinking, I'm getting ready to enter the work world, how do I know a company that's right for me? These are the 9 things to look for. First of all, the first thing that drains inspiration is fear, a fear of failure, a fear of criticism. Get to know the people in the company and find out, is it a culture of fear? Because over time, that turns out that that's an incredibly toxic emotion to deal with, and I can promise you it'll drain the inspiration over time. The second thing you should look for, the second anti-muse, if you will, is a sense of settling and boredom. And again, if you're going to enter a company, you should really be doing your homework and not just talk to the people interviewing you, but talk to friends or family or anyone that'll sit down with a cup of coffee for you to tell you about the company. If they tell you that they've become settled and they're kind of bored, know that that is a major force that over time will add up and drain a lot of the inspiration and joy out of work. So you have to look for signs that the organization keeps their people challenged, growing, and learning, and avoids settling in boredom. The third force that drains our inspiration is a sense of inundation or being overwhelmed. This one is really easy to pick up in an interview or in talking with a company's employee before you join them. Do you get a sense that the overwork and the overwhelmed environment is just part of the culture? That they make far too few choices. There's far too many priorities. People are running around like chickens with their heads cut off, and that this sense of being overwhelmed is just part of the way it is. Well, that's going to add up over time, and if it exists, it's something you really want to try to avoid in a company. The next anti-muse, the thing that drains our inspiration, is a loss of control. Do you sense that employees in that company feel like they have very little control over the outcomes and what they get a chance to be involved in? So, for example, do you talk to people that feel like they're rarely empowered? Very rarely are things delegated down to them. Very rarely do they get a chance to take it and run with it. They feel very little control over their circumstances. That, I can assure you, James, over the long haul, will drain the passion for your work, and you want to avoid that in an organization that you're considering joining. Another powerful anti-muse is a dwindling self-belief. And some cultures are more likely to add to this than others. And what I mean by that is, are the types of people that you talk to, do you find that they started to doubt themselves and their own ability? That the place that they work at continually gets them to question themselves and whether or not they're good enough? Perhaps it's a type of environment that rarely gives encouragement and positive feedback. Maybe it's the kind of place that's filled with toxic managers, and it shows up on the front lines as a lot of people who aren't very self-confident. That would be a major warning sign to look out for and avoid before you join a company. The sixth source, and again, these are not my opinion, James. I've been studying what inspires us at work and what makes a company inspiring to work for over 20 years. And I could tell you these are very, very real. The sixth force is what I call disconnectedness. This happens when you've been in the company. Usually, it starts to really show up, statistically speaking, right at about the year mark, where you start to realize I'm not really that connected to my coworkers. I'm outside of the clique. People have their own little things they keep to themselves. They do to themselves. They do whatever they're going to do with themselves in their own small groups. Maybe you're made to feel like an outcast, or there's some people that are toxic in the culture and make you want to disjoin from the culture there. It's really important to look for a sense of community in a company. Does it seem like it's a cohesive unit and people have fun together? Because if not, I can promise you it will wear down your soul over time, and you will want to leave that job eventually. Yep. 3 more forces to talk on, and then we can go wherever you want. Another thing to look for, and this one is sneaky, James, very, very sneaky to look for in a company before you join it. Is there an absence of people creating and people expressing their thought, their genuine thought, and people bringing unique, creative contributions to the table each and every day? Some places are wonderful at being very creative in nature, at bringing out the innovative best in them, in the employees. If this isn't the company you're looking at, be very careful, because what happens over time is when we feel like we're no longer contributing our unique creative contributions, it has a profound impact on our passion and happiness at work. As human beings, we just have a central, fundamental need to feel like we're creating and contributing uniquely to our place of work.
Yeah, I think just jumping in there, Scott, I think that's why I ended up starting the podcast, was not feeling fulfilled at work, was needing a creative outlet outside of work, and then looking to do something which ultimately became the podcast here.
And I'll bet, James, that the podcast for you is fulfilling and enriching and is helping you learn and grow along the way. And I'll bet that you feel like you get a chance to make more of an impact on the world. Are those fair statements?
No, completely true. And I tend to get that a lot more from the podcast than I do from some of the work I've done over the years.
And therein lies the problem. When we don't get a chance to express ourselves creatively, it can add up and cause people to produce side projects in their life. There's nothing wrong with that, but if those projects only serve to illustrate the shortcomings of their own job, that could become problematic over time.
Yep.
The other two forces to close out, and again, I'm talking about the 9 anti-muses. These are the forces that research shows can drain your inspiration over time, disproportionately, significantly speaking, more than any other elements of work life. There's two left. This one is pretty devastating, and I simply call it a sense of insignificance. If you feel that your work truly doesn't really matter, that you're not making that much of an impact on anything that matters to anyone, that's a real problem. And young job candidates have easy ways of looking for this. Does the company have a profound mission? Does it have a sense of purpose? Do the employees that you work with or people that you interview with, do you smell a sense of they feel that what they do matters to the company, to the coworkers, and to them? Is there a sense of significance in the work? And if not, major warning signals before you would go any further with that job. And then finally, and this one is probably the easiest to spot of all of them, it's what I call lack of evocation. And what I mean by that, James, is inspiration is often evoked in us. Some external force does something that causes us to feel a sense of inspiration. Well, what if you work in a work environment where that's completely absent? A culture that's completely toxic, or most often this shows up in the form of a truly nasty boss, or a manager or a leader that, despite all the wonderful things you love about your job, sucks the life out of it because they're such a terrible human being, or a terrible leader, or a terrible manager. These things should be hopefully relatively easy to spot as you talk to people that have worked there, or as you talk to people that report to the person that you might report to, if you can find out who that is. Yep. And it's something to avoid because it can destroy all their sense of inspiration that you bake into your job. So those are the 9 anti-muses, the things to keep an eye out for if you're looking for a job, or the things to get real with if you're feeling them, if you're already currently in a job. We can steer wherever you want now, James.
No, cheers, and thank you. They're brilliant. And as a management consultant, I've been in and worked at quite a few different companies in public sector, private sector, and I think I've definitely come across all 9 of those in different workplaces. I think some of the workplaces have probably got most of them, which is, you can just walk into a building and you can just, you just almost feel the energy just being sucked out of you as you come across the different 9 anti-muses that you mentioned in different forms or another. And over the interview, we're going to delve into a couple of those in detail, but maybe just stepping back a bit first. And you talk in the book about asking yourself what used to inspire you, but how about if you're 21 years old and you've not really had much previous work experience? How can you then begin to think about what has inspired you, or what will inspire you from a work perspective?
Great question. And that's a major discerning fact that I often point out to when I'm doing keynotes for millennial crowds. They may be so young that they can't look back and say, well, I haven't lost anything yet because I haven't gained anything yet. That is where indeed it is okay to ask yourself what inspires you, and understand that here's the important thing. If I were to ask you, let's just try a little test, and this will be a good example for your listeners, James, without thinking too hard about it. If I just asked you right now, just tell me one thing, James, in your life, in your work life, let's say, that inspires you. When are you inspired?
When I've got a good boss.
Okay, when you got a good boss. Okay, so here's part of the problem with that. First of all, it's a bit passive, because you have to count on that boss being good, and the boss to do good things to make you happy. It can be elusive because statistics show that most of us want a good boss. We want an inspiring boss more than any other factor. And yet less than half of us could say, no, or even close to half of us could say that our boss is actually inspiring or a great boss. And even if you have a good boss, it can get repressed by a really nasty coworker. So the first thing is to, when you're 21 years old and you don't have the experience of how you lost it, start with, okay, I know a great boss would inspire me. And if you know that in general, things that inspire you can be passive, elusive, or repressed, enter that knowing that. Look for it aggressively. Don't allow it to be repressed. Know that to be true about you and keep that in perspective. So for you, James, you know a good boss lights you up. So when that boss has a bad day, don't let it get you down. Don't let it repress the feelings and the joy you get out of having a great boss. If your boss isn't giving you enough of your time, that's where it's becoming elusive and passive. That's okay. You can find a way to express to your boss how important it is that he or she keeps that one-on-one meeting with you once a week because you find him or her very inspiring and you draw energy from them. So it's a long way of saying when you're younger in your career, be very clear on what it is that inspires you, know why it inspires you, and then protect it. Don't let it be elusive. Don't let it get repressed. Go after it aggressively and protect it. And then you start to build up this little fundamental well of the things that really, really matter to you and that really inspire to you. And quite often they're things that are in line with our values. I'm going to bet, James, you are inspired by having a great boss because you're the kind of person that wants to be known as a great boss. Is that fair?
That's true. It's always it's always good when you get people looking up to you and respecting the work that you do.
Yeah. So often a place to start for young people especially, is with your core values. And anything that supports your core values almost inherently is going to inspire you. So keep asking, why? Why does that thing inspire me? And that will help you keep it front and center. And then you'll start to identify the things. And by the way, once you jump into that work world, James, and I'm sure you know this, you quickly affirm or deny your thoughts on what's actually inspiring. So, for example, many people think they'll jump into the workforce and they'll find, man, my next raise, that's going to be so inspiring. They're 21 years old, right?
For about a week.
For about a week. And that's what statistics will show. They believe that. And they go after it. And they don't let anything repress. But then reality kicks in and they learn, wow, that next raise isn't really that inspiring because of 9 other things that are happening at work. Yep. So you keep you just keep an open mind as you're developing what truly inspires you, and make sure it reflects the authentic you and not what's expected of you, not what you're expected to be inspired by. It has to be true to you as a person. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, that's brilliant and really good. And values are such an important thing to think about, and it's often very overlooked with people kicking off with their they're looking for their first graduate job. Is they often just try and think about trying to grab the first job that comes across their path, as opposed to really thinking about the values and what's going to make them happy further down the line. Also, just maybe jumping into inspiration in a bit more detail. How important do you think it is for it to be an internal thing as opposed to an external thing? So getting inspiration from yourself as opposed to needing it from somebody else.
Yeah, I think it's really, really crucial. And in most of the book that I wrote, Find the Fire, frankly, out of all the anti-muses, 8 out of the 9 of them, I'm really pleading with the reader to understand that inspiration and truth it's up to you. And a big misnomer about inspiration, James, is that a lot of people they fundamentally believe that inspiration is something that happens to them. They have to sit around and wait for inspiration to show up, and it's preserved for only people who climb the mountains of Tibet to see a monk high on a peak. Those are the people that find inspiration, and it's just not true. Social science teaches us it is just not true. In truth, inspiration can be codified and you can coax it. You absolutely can create the conditions where inspiration is much more likely to happen. And those conditions are the reversal of the 9 anti-muses that I talked about before. When you're aware of what those are, you can reverse course and create your own inspiration in your place of work.
Oh, brilliant. And you mentioned earlier that you spent lots of your career with the global behemoth Procter & Gamble, and many of the listeners will be applying to big companies such as P&G, who have big graduate schemes that hoover up, lots of young graduates starting out. Do you think it's realistic for people who join these graduate schemes to be inspired and fired up at work all of the time?
I think it's inherently unrealistic. And I think what I always try to teach is if you're inspired all the time, you're really missing something about life. Something must not be registering because it's inherently impossible to be inspired all the time. The key is it's all about balance and perspective, and this is really important. You almost need to feel, and James, I think you inherently know this to be true in life. You need to feel some of that pain. You need to feel some of those downs to better appreciate the ups.
Yep.
And the search in a job is not one for the perfect job. It's for the profound job. And what I mean by that is the perfect job will not exist. I can promise you that. If your listeners take nothing else away, take that away. They will find flaws over time. It's human nature. You're not looking for perfect. You're looking for profound, something that inherently links with what's deeply meaningful to you at your core, what brings significance, what will help you grow and become a better version of yourself every day, and what links to your value systems so that your happiness is sustained over time. And when it does suffer dips, and it will, if it's a profound choice that you made and you're deeply linked to that job, your recovery rate will be 3 times that of the person who is not in a job that's truly right for them, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. I guess it would just be a balancing act of, just making sure that the dips just don't go on for 2, 3, 5, 10 years, and you suddenly find that what inspired you at the beginning is not inspired you for 10 years, and you're in a job that you really don't like.
So true. I have all too many stories that I could tell about people that hung on too long in a job that they didn't like, and could have made a move much sooner and been a lot happier a lot sooner. That's also human nature. That's probably why I have so many of those stories, but sure would like your listeners to avoid that scenario someday in the future.
Yeah, and when we went through the 9 anti-muses, one of the ones which I think is really prominent for people applying for graduate jobs, and also one that I see with the people that I coach, is fear, particularly a fear of failure when they're applying for jobs. How can people begin to tackle this one?
Yeah, it is such a problem. And, research shows, James, that for over 50% of all adults, they would say that it is the number one thing, fear of failure, that has kept them from not only achieving, but even revisiting their goals.
Oh.
It's incredibly common. It's incredibly powerful. And one of the things I talk about in keynotes is I share an MRI scan of a brain that's a pretty famous shot amongst neuroscientists. And it shows the impact that a fear of failure has physically on the brain. And your users can easily picture this. Picture a shot, a silhouetted shot, a scan of the brain, and you see all these bright lights in the center and the back half of the brain. And that's the fear of failure triggering in the parietal lobes of the brain and getting the brain to respond in the way that it will. What's fascinating about this MRI scan is if you look to the front of the brain, it's completely dark. There's no light spots there. And what that means is that's the part of the brain that's responsible for risk-taking, growth, exploration. And the MRI scan proves essentially that our fear of failure literally shuts down, physically speaking, the part of our brain responsible for taking risk. So it is a very real problem, and it is mathematically impossible, even for your listeners that are saying, yeah, I hear you, but I'm pretty good. I don't suffer from fear of failure. It's mathematically impossible that you don't have someone in your life that doesn't suffer from it.
Yeah.
And so what I often say is the most important thing that we can do is to realize that fear engages your brain in the wrong conversation. And you have the power for you or yourself to reframe the way you think of a fear of failure. And I talk about this in the book, and I'll give you just a few samples of some of my favorite ways to do this, James. So for example,
yes, please.
I can't tell you how many times I've done this to myself, even as I've left corporate and entered the world of being an entrepreneur. I remind myself consistently, truth be told, there's only 3 ways that I can actually fail. It's when I quit, when I don't improve, or when I never try. That's it. Those are the 3 ways to fail. I tell myself all the time that failure is an event, not a person. So many times over the years, I've met people that attributed a failure as a harbinger of things to come. It was an albatross in their life. It defined who they were, and that is not the case. Failure is not a person. It's an event. So many times I tell myself, this is another way to reframe failure, that failure doesn't happen to you. It happens for you. It doesn't happen to you to destroy you. It happens for you so you can learn and grow and become a better version of yourself. And then one last way to reframe, and I will have, ticked off 4 in like 60 seconds. You can also remind yourself that when you suffer, or when you're not the one that really suffers, I should say, when you fail. It's your ego that suffers. And your ego and you are 2 separate things. They're not the same thing. And if you can see that and separate your ego and put it at the kids' table with the rest of your unhelpful emotions, you begin to understand that you're not your ego, and failure doesn't have to put a dent in who you are as a human.
Brilliant. No, Scott, I love that. And that's such easy, simple ways just to begin to, when you do feel that knot of fear in your stomach that's rising up when you're about to do something brave, that just to reframe it and think about it in a different way. And I see it with people I coach, and they talk about companies they want to apply for, and you ask them, well, have you applied? And they're like, oh no, I'm a bit scared. But you're never going to get the job if you don't apply for it. So you've got to just step forward and embrace it and give it a go, as you mentioned.
Very well said.
One of the other anti-muses, I guess, is also linked to fear that you talk about is dwindling self-confidence. And especially with jobs, when you're going for interviews and assessment centres, self-belief plays such an important role in looking for a job. Again, linked to this, how can listeners begin to increase their confidence?
Yeah, there's lots of ways to do that. I think one of the most powerful ways is, when I say to mind the inner monologue, it's so interesting, James. For the book, I had a chance to interview a fairly prominent hypnotherapist who taught me an awful lot about the human brain, how it works, and psychologically what we go through as we go through this process of beating ourselves up, and this person told me that, and I found this utterly fascinating, regardless of the ailment that she was treating as a hypnotherapist, no matter what it was, if someone came in and they were overeating, if they couldn't stop cheating on their spouse, if they couldn't stop smoking, if they couldn't stop stealing, whatever they were treating, deep underneath was the same underlying cause, regardless of the ailment she was treating. And that was a fundamental belief of, I'm not good enough. And over and over and over again, this belief comes up in our head. This inner monologue starts. Why don't people apply for that job that they really want, James? When you ask them why haven't they applied? Because deep in their heart, they're saying, I'm not good enough. Mm-hmm. And so we engage in this incredibly, I guess, unrelenting inner monologue that can just pummel us down into a downward spiral. And you have to really know that happens, be okay with that, accept that, understand you're in the middle of it, of when it's happening, and then gently talk to yourself like you would talk to your best friend, right, James? If I came to you, James, let's say we were long lost friends, and I came to you and I said, man, I had a rough day. I really screwed up this meeting. My boss asked me this question and I blew it. I highly doubt you would say, man, you really screwed that up. You're a loser. No. What are you going to, you wouldn't do that to me. So why would you do that to yourself?
Yep.
So it's so important that you catch yourself and have that awareness. And I know it sounds so easy, but really awareness is the first step. You have to be intentional, especially if you tend to beat yourself up a lot. You have to catch yourself in the moment when your inner dialogue is spiraling down. And it's very teachable. It's very practicable. I've gotten better at it myself over the years, James. And then knowing that moment, okay, I'm going to talk to myself like I would talk to a buddy of mine. I'm not going to continue to beat myself up. One other powerful way to stop this, the downward spiral, and this is so important, is to continually seek authenticity and not approval. When we continually compare ourselves, what I call the comparison dragon, to other people, it is a never-ending chase of the tail.
Yeah.
You will never stop. And by the way, it gets worse in the social media world we live in now, James, where for all the people that spend time on social media, listen, I can promise you, we're comparing our blooper reels to everyone else's highlight reels.
Yeah.
Best of everyone is presented in social media, and it's creating a backdrop where as a society, and especially for millennials entering the workforce, they're already one of the lowest self-esteem based generations of all time. And you have that as a backdrop. And when you start to compare yourself to others continually, it's such a source of misery. The only comparison that matters is to who you were yesterday.
Yep.
And are you going to be a better version of that person rather than comparing to someone else? And worry about being true to your authentic self and not the person that others expect of you. Because when you try to be something you're not, it creates dwindling self-belief. You begin to believe you're not even your authentic self, and it can all go downhill from there.
Oh, that's I love that, Scott. And the comparison thing is so difficult as well when you're applying for jobs and you see friends and, oh, he's got a job with so-and-so paying X amount of money, and this person's got an internship and I've not got one yet, or they've got a summer placement with this company, and they might be applying for completely different jobs in completely different industries and things that you would never want to do, but still end up maybe comparing them to you. It's such a dangerous game.
So true. And I've seen it wither so many strong, confident, able-minded people. If your listeners take only one other thing away, it would be that the comparisons that matter are to who you were yesterday.
No, I love that. And just on you mentioned the self-confidence thing and the inner monologue, and it's something that doesn't really go away. I mean, this will be episode 73 of the podcast, but when I'm approaching authors such as yourself, when I'm sending that email, I still have a little thing on my right shoulder saying, they're not going to reply, or they're going to respond saying, who are you? I'm not coming on the show. And when you're launching episodes, I'm still waiting for someone to tap me on the shoulder and say, why have you got a podcast? You shouldn't be putting all this content out there. And it's just, it's something you just got to recognize, but ignore, and just crack on with what you were doing.
That's right. We have to stop undermining ourselves and at the same time be patient with yourself. James, all of those things you just described are so incredibly normal. It's what it means to be human, right? To doubt your place occasionally in the world, and that's okay. It's when you dwell there too long that it gets harder and harder to pull yourself out of that. So as long as your listeners recognize that truth about themselves, if that exists, that's the 50% of the battle. And then it's being intentional thereafter about not letting yourself dwell there.
So, Scott, time is running away with us today. So maybe one final question before we move on to our weekly staple questions. What advice would you give someone who's maybe starting out with their first graduate job and they're not really sure if it's a job for them, and they're not sure if they're settling or it's a job that's going to inspire them? What advice would you give them?
The most important advice I could give is to know what the 9 anti-muses are, lay them out in front of you, and I kind of walk through them. Not every anti-muse is going to be particularly troublesome for every single person. But if you're aware of what over time tends to drain the life out of us, it's very, very helpful to have that top of mind, so you're on alert and you're looking for that, and you're looking for little signals of that rather than being ignorant to them when you're in the process of interviewing. So, for example, you will spot signs of fear of failure in the company that you're about to interview with. You'll spot signs of a dearth of creating, or a loss of control, or a community that is disconnected. Those are 4 anti-muses I just spelled out. Know what those are. Keep them in front of you. Know which ones are particularly troubling for you, and be on alert as you're entering a new job and considering employment there.
Brilliant sound advice there, Scott. And listeners, you don't have to worry about frantically writing down the anti-muses there. You'll be able to find links and a full transcript to everything we've discussed today in the show notes at graduatejobpodcast.com/inspiration. And you'll also find links to Scott's brilliant books as well, so you can get yourself some copies. So, Scott, moving on to our weekly staple questions, putting you on the spot now.
Right
what
on.
One book would you recommend that listeners should read?
Yeah, and I'll pick books other than my own. One book I really enjoy is by Todd Henry. It's called Die Empty. It's all about getting all your best creative work out there in the life and the amount of time that you've been given on this planet. Highly recommend it.
Oh, that's it's going to shame me now, but that book has been on my shelf for about 3 years, and I've not got around to reading it. So I'm going to make sure that I read it this weekend. But yeah, that is a good recommendation. And Scott, what internet resource would you point listeners to?
Yeah, I love a resource called Unsplash. It's a brilliant resource that allows you to download free, really high quality, high def images. And all it asks you to do is give credit to the people who took the picture, so that you're kind of doing them good. You're getting their name out in the world, and they're free images for you, but at the same time, you're doing good, and the quality of images are fantastic. So for anybody that is putting presentations together, or if anybody has their own website or is trying to create their own product online, it's a wonderful resource.
I like the sound of that one. Some of my images I use on the website are pretty pony, so I will definitely check out Unsplash. And if you notice, listeners, a sudden uptick in the quality of the images I'm using, then you can thank Scott for that one. So, Scott, final question then. What one tip can listeners implement today to help them on their job search?
Yeah, and I would say for me, it's going to underscore a lot of what we talked about. It's finding an authentic fit for things that matter to you, not what is supposed to matter to you. So many young job candidates will go and search for the job that they're supposed to want, that their mom wants them to want, that their peers are going after. Can't tell you how many friends I saw go into investment banking because the money was so great and it seemed cool, and that's what everybody was doing way back when at the time.
Yep.
And the happiest ones in their lives are the ones that right from the get-go, even if you don't find that job at the first time, but you're true in your honesty and your intent to find a job that lines up with your authentic you and what truly makes you happy, because we only have one life. That's the most important opening tip.
Brilliant. That is a nice place for us to finish the interview on. Scott, many thanks. What's the best way for people to get in touch with you and the work that you do?
Yeah, thanks for asking. They can go to scottmautz.com, SCOTTMAUTZ.com. And I've even put up a special gift there for your listeners today, James. I have a free accompanying workbook that goes along with the book, Find the Fire. If people want to download that, then that'll allow them to really capture the main thoughts, and research is really clear on when we have an opportunity to fill things out, especially in a fill-in-the-blank fashion. It helps us retain key concepts. So your listeners can get that free downloadable workbook at scottmautz.com.
Amazing. Scott, thank you so much for appearing on the Graduate Job Podcast.
Thank you for having me, James. It's been a lot of fun.
There you go. Episode 74 done and dusted. Many thanks again to Scott Mautz for a really fun and insightful episode. Lots to take away from it. I think my favourite was his comment about failure, and that there are only 3 ways to fail. When you quit, when you don't improve, and when you don't try. Very wise words. And if you take nothing else away with you but that advice, for the next time you start to get scared as you look for a graduate job, you won't go far wrong. Do check out the show notes at graduatejobpodcast.com/inspiration, where you'll find links to Scott, his books, his website, and everything else that we've talked about today. Whilst you're there, don't forget to head on over to graduatejobpodcast.com/subscribe and sign up so that you don't miss a thing. Despite my best intentions, I know I can be sporadic in getting episodes out to you, especially when the sun's shining, so it's the best way to stay up to date with what I'm up to. I'm also developing a brilliant course on how to get a graduate job, which will distill down all my years of coaching into one place. So subscribe to make sure you don't miss the launch details for that one. If you do have any questions, need some help coaching or with an application, then do drop me a line, again at hello@graduatejobpodcast.com. And finally, if you would like to support the show and to help ensure that I can keep putting out great episodes, one way you can do that is by clicking on the Amazon links in the show notes. Amazon pays a very small commission to me if you do so. It doesn't cost you anything, but it does help to keep the lights on here with the hosting and other costs like that. So that is just about everything from me. Do join me next week when I speak with Sarah Cave as we explore how to get a training contract. It's a goodie. All that remains is to say I hope you enjoyed the episode today, but more importantly, I hope you use it and apply it. See you next week.